Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise and get straight to the insights that matter.
And today, we're looking at Africa. There's this incredible energy, isn't there? Especially coming from the youth.
Absolutely. It's dynamic, it's changing things. So the big question we're asking is, how are Africa's young people shaping the continent right now and, its future? And how does all that energy fit with the big development plans, the grand visions?
Yeah, it's a fascinating contrast sometimes. For this deep dive, we're digging into two really powerful sources. First, there's an analysis from WACSI, that's the West Africa Civil Society Institute.
Yeah.
It's called Africa's Youth-Led Movements, a catalyst for people-driven change.
Yeah.
And it really captures that immediate, raw impact of youth activism.
Okay, so the grassroots view. And the second?
Second, we've got the Second Continental Report from the African Union. This gives us the high-level picture. It's very data-driven, looking at progress on Agenda 2063.
Agenda 2063, Africa's big ambition. So our mission today is to sort of unpack these two angles. We want to find the surprising bits, see where they connect, and really give you the insights to understand this multifaceted push for change in Africa.
Exactly. You'll get a sense of both that bottom-up energy and the top-down strategy.
Okay, let's get into it. Maybe start with that WACSI report and the youth movements. What's the backdrop here?
Well, the big picture fundamentally is demographics. Africa is, it's the world's youngest continent. The median age is just 19.
19. That's incredibly young.
It is. But then you look at the leadership, and the average age is 63.
Wow, that's a huge gap.
It's a stark contrast. And our sources say this is a major source of frustration. Young people feel marginalized, and it's fueling this real surge in youth-led protests we're seeing across the continent.
Right, that frustration has to go somewhere. And the WACSI report, it gives specific examples, doesn't it? Like hashtag #EndSARS.
Absolutely. Hashtag #EndSARS in Nigeria was massive. Young people mobilizing against systemic corruption, police brutality. It was powerful. And more recently, you had the hashtag Reject Finance Bill 2024 protests in Kenya. That was largely Gen Z, millennials.
Yeah, I followed that. It was intense.
Yeah.
Heavy police response, too.
Very heavy. At least 39 deaths reported, sadly. But they were out there demanding accountability, calling for President Ruto to resign. Real defiance.
And it's not isolated, is it? The report mentions other places.
Oh, yeah. Senegal, where youth action actually forced the government to reverse delaying elections. Yeah. You've got climate activists in Uganda pushing back against the East African crude oil pipeline despite facing serious harassment arrests.
Right. Then Mozambique, after the rapper Azagaya died, rallying against corruption.
Exactly. Zimbabwe, student clashes over political repression. Ghana, the hashtag Occupy Jalorby House protests, highlighting economic hardship. It's widespread.
So what's enabling this? How are they organizing so effectively?
Well, digital activism is key. Social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, these aren't just chat platforms. They're like essential tools now.
For organizing, mobilizing.
Exactly. And for getting the word out internationally, hashtag campaigns are huge for amplifying voices, putting pressure on governments in a way that maybe wasn't possible before.
But it's not easy. Governments push back hard. You mentioned police brutality, arrests.
Yeah, and internet shutdowns are a common tactic too. Intimidation. In Uganda, activists have reported surveillance, even abductions. It's risky.
So how do they adapt? How do these movements keep going when facing that kind of pressure?
That's where it gets really interesting. The report points to lessons learned, especially from Kenyan youth. They're talking about needing flatter, leaderless organizations.
Leaderless, how does that work?
Think of it like a spider-like network structure. Lots of legs, no single head to cut off. It makes the movement more agile, much more resilient to what the source calls decapitation tactics from the state.
I see. Harder to shut down if there's no single leader to target.
Exactly. It empowers more people within the network, makes it more robust, more decentralized.
It raises this fundamental idea in the report, doesn't it? That every generation must lead its own revolution.
Precisely. The youth aren't just waiting for the future. They're actively trying to shape the present. They bring new energy, new perspectives.
And there's potential here for real people power revolutions, maybe echoing things like the Arab Spring. Although, as we know, the outcomes of those can be, unpredictable.
Very unpredictable. It's a powerful force, but where it leads isn't always clear.
Okay, so that's the grassroots energy. Let's shift now to that other perspective. The African Union's Agenda 2063, the big continent-wide plan.
Right, the Second Continental Report. This lays out Africa's blueprint for development over 50 years. We're talking sustained prosperity, integration, peace, culture, global influence. It's ambitious.
And how's it doing? The report gives a snapshot, right?
It does. Overall progress against the 2021 targets was reported at 51%, which is actually a pretty notable jump from 32% back in 2019.
Okay, 51%. So definite momentum from the top-down perspective. Let's unpack some of the key goals, the aspirations. How about aspiration 2, an integrated continent? That scored highly, didn't it?
It did. 84% overall score. Really impressive. And what's driving that mainly is the African Continental Free Trade Area, the FCFTA.
Yes, the FCFTA. That's been huge news. What are the specifics?
Well, at the time of the report, 54 AU members had signed it, 42 had ratified, 39 had deposited the paperwork. There's a commitment to cut tariffs on 97% of goods.
Wow.
And they've agreed on about 87% of the complex rules of origin. So, yeah, it's laying the groundwork for potentially the world's largest free trade zone. Serious integration effort.
And integration isn't just trade rules, it's physical connections too, infrastructure. That's goal 10, I think.
Right, world-class infrastructure. That scored a solid 70%. And you see real progress. Road networks, for instance. Ethiopia completed its entire section of the Trans-African Highway's missing link.
100%.
Yeah. Kenya completed 80% of its part. Energy is another big one. Electricity generation actually exceeded targets, added 193% of the expected megawatts. Countries like Senegal, Rwanda, Egypt, Cote d'Ivoire leading there.
Exceeded targets. That's significant.
It is. And digital connectivity is also booming. Mobile phone usage hit 91% of the target value. ICT's contribution to GDP is climbing steadily.
So lots of progress on the hardware of integration. What about the software? Peace and security. That's aspiration 4.
A peaceful and secure Africa, that scored 63%. Commendable progress. There's been a significant drop in conflict-related deaths continent-wide, down from 202 per 100,000 in 2013 to 144 in 2020.
That's a positive trend. What's behind that?
Initiatives like silencing the guns by 2020 seem to have had an impact, and they've revitalized the AU Peace Fund, collected over $230 million from 52 member states.
Okay, but it's not perfect, I assume.
No, definitely not. Despite the overall trends, some countries are still facing really serious security issues. Burkina Faso with terrorism, Niger with civil insecurity. Progress is often uneven, you know.
Right, a continent-wide average can hide regional hotspots. Okay, now, aspiration 1. A prosperous Africa. This one scored lower, only 37%. That seems surprising, given the integration and infrastructure progress.
It is striking, isn't it? Why is prosperity lagging? The report shows real GDP per capita only nudged up slightly, and unemployment actually increased to 15.5% in 2021.
Increased, despite FCFTA and infrastructure.
Yeah. And basic needs are still a huge challenge. Undernourishment affects nearly a quarter of the population, 24%. Access to safe drinking water is only 64%. Sanitation, just 44%.
So the big projects aren't necessarily translating into widespread individual prosperity or well-being yet?
It seems that way. There are individual country successes, of course. Egypt's reforms, Togo nearly doubling GNI per capita, Senegal's employment policy, Namibia reducing undernourishment, but the overall picture for prosperity is lagging.
That definitely feels like a potential source for the youth frustration we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. It highlights that disconnect. Now, link that to Aspiration 3, good governance, democracy, human rights. That also scored fairly low, 42%.
And a weak spot there was?
Capable institutions and transformed leadership, that specific target scored poorly, while people's belief in oversight mechanisms, press freedom, and fair elections has actually gone up.
Oh, that's interesting. Belief has increased.
Yeah, from low bases, but still, increases from 19% to 31% for oversight, 8% to 30% for press freedom, 22% to 35% for fair elections. So some positive signs in public perception, but the actual institutional capacity, the leadership transformation, that seems to be the bottleneck.
So people want it, they're starting to believe it's possible, but the structures aren't quite there yet.
That seems to be the story. Countries like Ghana, Kenya, Seychelles are making progress on adopting charters and anti-corruption efforts, but it's a work in progress.
Okay, now this next one, Aspiration 6, people-driven, women and youth, feels crucial, tying everything together. It scored 67%, which is moderate, but you said there's a real contrast within this one.
A huge contrast. On the one hand, women's empowerment shows some really impressive gains. More women with land rights, up from 16% to 23%. More women in national parliaments, 21%, up to nearly 28%.
That's good progress.
Significant reductions reported in sexual and physical violence against women and girls, down from over 40% to around 21%. And female genital mutilation rates are also down. Plus, you have initiatives like the AFDB's AFLA.
The Finance Action for Women Entrepreneurs.
That's the one, raised over $250 million. Real concrete support. So definite bright spots for women's empowerment.
Okay, but the youth side.
That's where it gets, frankly, alarming. Youth unemployment only saw a tiny reduction from 18.4% to 17.6%. But look at this. Child labor increased.
Increase.
Yeah, from 15% to 23%. Child marriage also increased 8% to 18%. And child human trafficking, it tripled from 1.1% to 3.3%.
So that's shocking, especially under an aspiration focused on youth.
It is deeply concerning, and birth registration rates are still way too low, 46%, nowhere near the 100% target. It really highlights this massive vulnerability for young people, even as the continent talks about being people-driven.
Are there any efforts specifically targeting youth in the report?
Yes, there are. Ghana has a national youth policy. Tanzania is working on creating decent jobs. Egypt managed to significantly cut its youth unemployment rate, which is notable.
Right.
And the AFDB has this Coding for Employment program. Trained over 90,000 young people, almost half women, aiming to create millions of tech jobs. So there are efforts, but clearly the scale of the challenge, particularly around child protection, is immense.
Right. It puts those youth protests in an even sharper context.
Okay.
Finally, Aspiration 7. Africa as a major partner in global affairs. That scored 58%. Commendable.
Yeah, Africa's definitely asserting itself more. Progress in funding budgets through national capital markets, less reliance on official development assistance as a percentage of budgets, signs of growing self-reliance.
But the challenge is
Still not hitting targets for tax revenue as a percentage of GDP. That's fundamental for self-financing development long term.
Got it. Now, we can't talk about recent development without mentioning COVID-19. How did the pandemic impact all this?
Oh, it hit hard. Major economic setbacks. GDP contracted sharply in many places. Lesotho down 15.7%, Mauritius nearly 15% in 2020.
Gosh.
Unemployment rose, governments faced huge fiscal pressure, and the informal sector, which employs so many, was devastated, pushed a lot of people back into poverty.
And health systems.
Strained to the absolute limit. They had this double burden, right? Fighting COVID and trying to keep essential services running. Some health targets actually went backwards. More malaria in Chad, higher death rates from other diseases in Lesotho because resources were diverted.
It exposed vulnerabilities. But how did Africa respond? Was it resilient?
Remarkably so, in many ways.
Yeah.
The AU and the Africa CDC acted fast with a joint strategy. They boosted testing capacity, got kits out there.
And individual governments.
Stepped up with pretty substantial stimulus and relief packages. Eswatini had a fund for laid-off workers. Namibia gave out an emergency income grant to over 750,000 people.
Wow, direct cash support.
Yeah. Senegal had a huge resilience program, over 1.6 billion US dollars. Ghana's coronavirus alleviation program offered tax breaks, lower interest rates.
Right.
Morocco launched a family allowance reaching millions of kids. Chad provided free electricity and water for vulnerable groups, so really trying to cushion the blow.
And the African Development Bank played a role, too.
Big role. Their $10 billion COVID response facility helped subsidize utilities in places like Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Senegal, quadrupled testing capacity in Ethiopia. And interestingly, the ICT sector actually grew its GDP contribution in some places, like Mauritius, showing its importance during lockdowns.
Okay, so a tough period, but also a story of resilience and coordinated action.
Let's try and wrap this up then. What are the main takeaways from this deep dive? Well, I think what stands out is this continent of profound contrasts. You have this incredibly young, dynamic population demanding change, often clashing with older leadership structures, using new tools, new tactics.
Yeah, that unstoppable force from the WACSI report.
Exactly. And then you have the top-down vision, Agenda 2063, which is making real progress in big areas like integration, infrastructure, even peace building to some extent.
But it's struggling with the fundamentals of prosperity and, ironically, with protecting and empowering its youth, the very group driving so much of the grassroots energy.
Precisely. There's a gap there. Significant strides in some areas, deep-seated challenges, even setbacks in others, particularly concerning youth vulnerability.
So for Africa to really flourish, to achieve those ambitious goals, here's a final thought to leave our listeners with. How can that powerful, decentralized energy of the youth movements connect more effectively with the structured, long-term vision of something like Agenda 2063? How do you make sure the revolution is both grassroots and sustainable, driving towards those shared goals?
That feels like the critical question, doesn't it? Bridging that gap, aligning that energy, that could be the key to unlocking Africa's full potential.